Module 1, Learning Outcomes. In this module, we'll focus on the difference between course level and assignment outcomes. We'll talk about how to write good assignment learning outcomes, how to align instructional activities and assignments with those outcomes, and identify strategies to communicate learning outcomes to students. Why do learning outcomes matter for student success? What are learning outcomes anyway? Learning outcomes are simply formal statements that articulate what students know and or can do upon completion of an educational experience. These can be about content, behaviors, or skills. Why do they matter? Learning outcomes set expectations for what students can expect to learn, provide a focus for the course, instructional activities, and assignments, and they create a shared understanding between faculty and students about the purpose and scope of the course or assignment. Learning outcomes are developed to guide educational decisions at multiple levels. Some institutions have identified institutional learning objectives. CSU Pueblo has not, although CSU Fort Collins has new institutional learning objectives as of May 2025. These institutional learning objectives define what students can expect to know and be able to do when they complete their university education. Program learning outcomes usually exist at the degree program level, and these are what students can expect to know and be able to do upon completion of that program. Course level outcomes are probably what we're most familiar with. These are what students can expect to know and be able to do upon completion of a course or a learning experience, and they may be guided in some cases by general education outcomes. Each institution has identified common learning outcomes for their courses in their general education program at CSU Pueblo and all university core curriculum at CSU Fort Collins. For this module, we'll focus on learning outcomes for assignments or learning tasks. All Colorado institutions must align their courses that transfer as general education to meet the GT Pathways outcomes and content criteria. At CSU Pueblo, the learning outcomes are defined for each GT Pathways category of courses and are further detailed in the general education assessment rubrics. More information about GT Pathways and those rubrics can be linked from your resource list and from the PDF version of this slide in your module. Instructional activities and assignments should be designed to help students gain the knowledge and skills identified in the course learning outcomes using those rubrics as guides. One of these rubrics, the critical thinking rubric, is displayed here on the slide. This is the first half of a two-part critical thinking rubric. This rubric breaks down the critical thinking learning outcome into sub-outcomes, such as explain an issue, utilize context, the relevance of context, utilize context, identify assumptions, and then defines the expectations for performance at 4 levels. The levels are meant to represent student learning from the first year at 1 or 2 through the senior or completion year, 3 or 4. It is expected that general education courses focus learning activities and assignments to help students achieve the sub-outcomes at levels 1 to 2, with some students excelling at higher levels. There's a link to this rubric and other rubrics in the notes section of this slide. What's the difference between a course outcome and an assignment outcome? Course outcomes are like a road trip destination, whereas assignment outcomes are the specific stops along the way. One example here is the GT Pathways critical thinking outcome. Explain an issue. Use information to describe a problem or issue and articulate a question related to the topic. This is a course level outcome. If you were to break down that outcome into an assignment, let's say a social issue analysis assignment, you might want students to be able to identify and describe a specific social problem, gather and synthesize information from credible sources, formulate a focused research question, apply basic sociological perspectives to understand the issue, and communicate their analysis clearly and coherently in written form. This may be a pretty big assignment overall, but all of these sub-outcomes will help students accomplish the course level outcome of critical thinking. The next few slides will focus on developing assignment level outcomes. Many of you may be familiar with using a concept called backwards design for your assignments. Backwards design really just starts with the end in mind. So the first step is to identify what students should know and be able to do by the end of the course. These are your course level learning outcomes. Step 2 has you thinking about the evidence that you will use to measure how well students have learned. What do students need to do to demonstrate their learning? Design the assessments that will allow your students to both practice and demonstrate to you their knowledge and skills. This could include papers, problem sets, examinations, and other kinds of activities. They do not always have to be graded activities. Step 3, structure the course instruction to help students achieve those learning outcomes. What learning experiences will students engage in to help them practice and build the knowledge and skills needed to achieve those learning outcomes and be successful on the assignment? More information about backwards design is linked with a book and a link in the notes section of the PDF of this slide. Developing assignment outcomes may seem intuitive to you at this point. Over the next few slides, we'll cover 5 steps to completing really good assignment outcomes. The first, start with course level learning outcomes. Which of the course level learning outcomes does this assignment that you're planning primarily address? What specific skills or knowledge from that learning outcome can students demonstrate through the assignment? Number 2, consider the assignment context. There are 4 elements to this. The first is the assignment type. Essays or research papers require really different outcomes than presentations or labs. Number 2, student level. Is this a first year assignment, second year, graduate student assignment? We know that the students in different years have different abilities. Prerequisites. What should students already know and be able to do? Or what do they need to practice through this assignment? And number 4, available resources. How much time do you have? What materials are available to students? And what support do they have? If you want, for instance, to be able to do revisions, do you have enough time and support to be able to give feedback to students for those revisions? Number 3, target the appropriate cognitive levels. We're going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy in a couple slides. Essentially, this means for first year courses, focus more on the lower levels of the taxonomy, and upper year courses should emphasize more higher order thinking. Identify sub-skills. Sub-skills are the component abilities or smaller, discrete skills that make up larger, more complex skills. They represent the building blocks that learners must achieve before they can successfully perform higher level or integrated tasks. Sub-skills might include vocabulary or number recognition, text comprehension, basic mathematical operations, pattern identification, or logical reasoning. We're going to show you the Bloom's taxonomy on a coming slide, and this will make more sense to you then. Number 4, include the key elements to your learning outcome. We'll discuss this in detail on a future slide. And number 5, check for alignment of learning outcomes, instructional activities, and assessment. Each assignment learning outcome should be accessible through the assignment format. Rubric criteria should reflect the assignment learning outcomes, and the point distribution should align with the importance you place on each outcome. There is a grading and feedback module in this course that will just spend more time on this question. Let's spend a few minutes on Bloom's taxonomy. You may have heard of this before and you may have a sense of it, but what is it and where did it come from? Bloom's taxonomy is a framework for categorizing educational goals and learning objectives, originally developed by Benjamin Bloom in 1956, and then significantly revised by Lauren Anderson and David Krathwohl in 2001. The revised version transformed Bloom's original nouns into action verbs and restructured the hierarchy to better reflect how learning actually occurs. The revised taxonomy consists of 6 cognitive levels arranged from what is considered lower order to higher order thinking skills. So this starts with remembering, like recall or recognition of specific information. It moves up to understanding, like exploring ideas or concepts, and then being able to take those concepts and apply in another situation to be able to use that information in a new way. Analyzing, evaluating, and creating are considered to be higher order thinking skills. And you can read more about this in the notes section of this slide and in the resources in this module. When using Bloom's taxonomy to write learning outcomes for course assignments, start by selecting appropriate action verbs from each of the cognitive levels that aligns with your educational goals. Match those cognitive levels to the assignment complexity. A research paper assignment might include outcomes like students will summarize current research on climate change impacts. That might show up in the understand cognitive level. Students will analyze the methodology used in 3 peer-reviewed studies. That might show up in the apply cognitive level. Students will evaluate the credibility and bias of different sources. I would look at that in the evaluating, judging a decision or course of action. Students will synthesize findings to propose solutions for local environmental challenges. This might appear in the creating level. Key elements of a learning outcome. A good learning outcome includes these 5 key elements. The first is student-focused language. The statement should be written from the student's perspective, focusing on what they will achieve and not what the instructor will do. Action verbs. Use strong action verbs from Bloom's taxonomy showed in the previous slide that describe what you can see and measure. Avoid vague terms like understand or know, as it's hard to see students understand or know. Specific learning. The statement should specify the particular knowledge set, skill, or ability the student will demonstrate. Criterion for success. Define what the student needs to know or do to meet the outcome. This can be explicitly stated or implied by the action verb and description. And the outcome should be measurable. It should be written in a way that allows you to assess whether or not the student has achieved the outcome and to what extent. Earlier we discussed identifying sub-skills. Here's a little more information. Sub-skills can include the cognitive, physical, or procedural skills that are the building blocks learners must achieve before they can successfully perform higher level or integrated tasks. Each sub-skill can be taught, practiced, and assessed independently while contributing to the overall competency. Instructors can identify sub-skills to see where students struggle, rather than simply noting that they cannot perform the overall task. Sub-skills can provide a logical sequence for instruction, allowing educators to scaffold learning by teaching those foundational elements that are needed before introducing more complex integrations. When you understand the sub-skills that make up the skill you're trying to achieve, assessment can become more precise, and instructors can evaluate student progress on specific components rather than making holistic judgments. Point number 5 of developing good assignment outcomes are to check for alignment. Your learning outcomes should be aligned with the instructional activities and assessments. So your learning outcome is what you want students to know when they successfully complete the assignment. What instructional strategies are you using in and outside of class to help students build that knowledge and those skills to successfully complete the assignment? And then what kinds of tasks will provide the evidence of how well students have achieved the learning outcome you've identified? Sometimes we can fall out of alignment without realizing it. This can cause frustration for both instructor and student alike. Some common misalignments include the following: creating outcomes that cannot be assessed through the assignment. An example includes expecting students to make conclusions about research findings when they do not have access to the data. Mismatching cognitive levels with student capabilities. This can include expecting first-year students to do advanced analysis or theory-driven work when they're really just being introduced to the concepts. And my favorite is number 3, using grading criteria that do not match with the outcomes. So for instance, if a learning outcome focuses on higher order thinking skills, but your assessments only test rote memorization, students are not going to be able to demonstrate their true understanding. If you identify complex skills as the desired outcome, but you grade on things like writing conventions, that can undermine both student motivation and learning. That alignment between the grading criteria and the outcomes are really important. How can you communicate learning outcomes to students? Learning outcomes are not just something that you just paste on your syllabus and forget about. You can use the assignment materials to clarify with students why they're doing the assignment, what they're expected to learn, and how they can succeed. Some practical strategies are noted here, and the notes are included with the PDF slides so you can read more. There's also more information in Module 4, Transparency in Teaching and Learning. Generative AI can serve as a powerful collaboration partner in creating assignment-level learning outcomes through some key approaches. The first one is through just brainstorming for developing your assignment and your learning outcomes. It can help you refine your language and be more clear. It can help you align and check consistency with your assignment, the learning outcomes, and your assessments. And it can help you customize for different contexts and student populations. We need to be careful, though, that AI is not a replacement for faculty expertise. AI is a tool that can help you do your job better, but you are ultimately the expert. This slide shows the UDL guidelines used in this module. For more information, visit udlguidelines.cast.org. We've provided some selected resources for you here and in the module on your Blackboard course. Thank you so much. For more questions or concerns, contact Stephanie Foster or Denise Henry.